Hi, I'm Brian LaGuardia, and I am the composer for Heir to the Empire, which is obviously not an officially sanctioned soundtrack from Lucasfilm, but it's just something I kind of wanted to do for a number of reasons. First of all, I read these books when I was like 12 years old, and they just blew my little mind, and I kind of wanted to just crawl into the same headspace I was when I was a kid and just play around with that. Um, Secondly, the new Disney canon is sort of teasing and hinting at a return to, the Heir to the Empire original storyline, more or less, with Thrawn being the big bad moving forward. And that always kind of fills me with just a little bit of sadness because we're never actually going to get Heir to the Empire. It's impossible at this point. It's inextricably linked as a story with the original characters, and some of those people are dead. Most of them are too old. And, it's just the time has passed for us to get something like that. But that's part of the beauty of the project, right? Is that you can fill in all of the gaps with your mind's eye. And that's actually part of the fun of the process for me too, specifically, is that I can sort of map out the shots in my head and use them as sync points for me to write to, which is a really unique process. I don't think a lot of people have approached it that way before. Like people have scored books before, but they haven't really scored a film that doesn't exist. So that challenge was kind of fun to me. And also, I just wanted to push my mock-up and composition and orchestration skills as far as I could. I'm going to go over the first 3 tracks in this series because I keep getting questions about, how did you get it to sound this good? What libraries are you using, et cetera, for people who are, wanting to do similar things perhaps in their own projects or write more scores like this for other Star Wars books. Or even Heir, another score to Heir. If you have a different interpretation, I'd love to hear it. But yeah, we're going to go through the first 3 tracks, which constitute the entirety of Chapter 1. And I think I explained in one of the descriptions in the videos that Chapter 3 is split up into 3 tracks for a very specific reason, which is, again, I'm scoring a film in my mind's eye. I'm not scoring a book. I'm scoring it as though it were a film adaptation, scored by more or less John Williams with a little bit of me sort of blended in there, a little bit of John Powell, various other things. And as a result, I have to spot this film, which those of you who don't know what spotting is, it's basically deciding where the music will go in a scene, where it should stop, where it should start, what it should be doing in the meantime, etc. And there were various moments in Chapter 1 that I just didn't think need any score at all. For example, when Pelion dresses down the cadet, silence. Don't need any music for that. A lot of you will recognize that I started with the very, very famous title crawl / main title that John Williams wrote for all 9 films, as a matter of fact. I decided to stick with this because while the books do sort of have a little bit more groundedness and a little more politics, sort of straying a little bit towards Andor, but doesn't go anywhere near that far, it still has that sparkle, that sort of Flash Gordon adventure serial vibe to it. So it was important for me to maintain that. But yeah, it was important to me to use those old themes and evoke the sort of same tone from the original trilogy, because it's the same characters and it's pretty much the same time period, and those are powerful tools that I wanted to work with. So now, for the main title, I wasn't really writing anything new. I was just basically mocking this up, which is, you can find this on the, I believe, the Hal Leonard website. But it's just a concert version of, among other things, his main title sequence. And this took quite a long time to transcribe because John Williams' orchestrations are very thorough, very detail-oriented. I mean, there obviously are a lot of doublings as well because it's a film score. You know, you want it to cut through all of the noise. But still just masterful. I mean, this is a must-own for anybody who's a serious composer or orchestrator, arranger, anything like that. Or a Star Wars fan, for that matter. So yeah, this was largely just a matter of translating all of that to MIDI. Let's give a listen to how it sounds. I still get a little giddy sometimes that I mean, this piece of music in particular, of course, means a lot to me, and it evokes strong feelings in me every time I hear it. But beyond that, it's just so mind-boggling to me that I just did this on my computer, and it sounds this good. Because it, like, 5 years ago, this would not have been possible at all. Samples were not this good. This is mostly because of Aaron Venture brass, and I have an obsession with the Aaron Venture libraries because they're so good. I was able to, for example, trumpets in particular are really, really hard to get right in a Mockup, or even just as like a sample library developer. They so often end up sounding like tinny and toy and fake and like too much buzz. There are any number of ways where it just doesn't sound quite right. And this is a mock-up. It's still not quite lifelike. It's not what you would expect from definitely the London Symphony or anything like that. But it's so close now that it actually it might fool people who are not like professional musicians. And all I had to do was just a little bit of CC automation. CC and velocity, choosing the correct velocities for each note. Those are the two really big things. Because you'll see, for example, let's see if I can find a good spot. I guess, yeah, any of these triplets, that da-da-da, anytime they're doing that, it's high velocity, of course, because you want that attack pretty pronounced. But also, you'll see that the mod wheel doesn't move for those because you don't need it. It doesn't sustain long enough for the sound to become Uncanny Valley. But then, for these long sustains, right? Let's see. Da dee da 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 da. There's all kinds of movement there, and you have to exaggerate it as well with specifically with Aaron Venture libraries because it is sample modeled versus regular samples. Normally, sample libraries just give you, here's a staccato for this note, here's a legato note for this note, and you choose your articulation and you just slap it on there. And if it's legato, you can still give it some shape with CC. But it's extra important here because sample modeled libraries don't do that. They instead just give you a bass pitch and then they manipulate it with algorithms based on your CC. And that's how you can get such a responsive sound. And responsive means that it's more realistic because a musician will absolutely give shape to a note, even if they don't have dynamic markings indicating it that way. For example, there's no hairpins on any of these notes, but a player is still going to give it shape and direction because that's just how you make it musical. That's what you do as a musician. So yeah, It's mind-blowing to me that I can especially get trumpets to sound this good. And did you notice there was a little bit, people were a little bit off for that one triplet, that last triplet. I was gonna fix it, and then I thought, well, that kind of makes it more realistic, right? It's like real players are on the stage, like adapting in real time to what the conductor is doing. Because even as it is, it's already a little too perfect. That's one of the telltale signs for like a professional to listen to this and go, oh, that's a mock-up. But, you know, that's one of the ways that gives it just a little bit of character, in my opinion. Shout out to Cinematic Studio Strings as well, because listen to when the strings take over the melody. Listen to this. You would not believe how impossible that was to get right with my other string libraries. And with Cinematic Studio Strings, it was just a breeze. It also helps too because they have a more diffuse sound, a more old school vibe to them. Most libraries would definitely have you switch articulations here and here. You know, ba-da-da-da-da, the rebos here, and the fun little thing here, dum, buddy. But I did, look, there are no key switches here. There are no key switches anywhere. All I did was, here, let me show you. I don't know why this is displaying so oddly, but you can more or less see what I'm doing here. This is the Cinematic Studio Strings for Violin 1. This whole thing is just on marcato. It's on a single articulation, F sharp 0. And it's all in the CC and the velocities, exactly like Aaron Venture Winds and Brass, which is why I like it so much. It fit right into my workflow just fine. You'll notice that it's a little behind the beat, the samples are, so I have to offset that in the MIDI, but it just sounds magnificent. I probably shouldn't call attention to this, but this is, after all, a video dedicated to learning. And also, you know, my goal here was not to get it perfect. My goal here was to set a deadline and stick to it, which is a huge part of being a professional composer. At a certain point, you just have to let go, say it's good enough, and release it. And I could not. I fiddled with this for hours, and I couldn't get it quite right. But fortunately, the rest of the mix sort of drowns it out just enough so that you don't really notice it in the context of everything else going on. But I'll play it by itself so that you can hear it. The trumpet figures here, I could not get it to sound quite right with Infinite Brass. It was the very first time, and I've used it for hours of music, and it sounds phenomenal. This is the first time it's ever let me down. And maybe I just didn't have enough time to mess with it, but it didn't know how to do these runs fast enough for whatever reason. So let me play it for you with just the trumpet soloed so that you can hear. Okay. Ooh. Trumpet 1, 2, 3. Here we go. The script is like catching the timing not quite right here and there. Normally what you do when you hear that, oh, just re-record it. You know, it was a fluke. Just treat it like an actual performance, because musicians usually don't get it right on the first try either. You have to do a couple of takes, and maybe even, you know, combine them. But for whatever reason, this the scripting here just couldn't get these agile figures quite right. It's usually fine if it's staccato, you know, if it's, which is another very John Williams thing, like fast staccatos in the trumpets. But because these were slurred for whatever reason, you know, but again, in the context of everything else going on, you don't really hear the imperfections. I mean, listen. Those of you who have keen ears will notice that I added one thing in here that was not in the score, which is a very subtle, like mezzo forte, suspended cymbal roll. I just thought it was a nice addition. I'm a percussionist, so maybe, you know, I'm biased in the regard of things need more percussion, but it just kind of helped sell the arrival there. Even though the triplets leading up to it and the flutes and the violins, again, was another moment where I was like, how are samples able to do this? Okay, now for those of you, and I'm assuming all of you if you're watching this at all, and especially if you've made it this far, who are Star Wars music fans, this is the moment where the new stuff has to kick in. And it's, of course, different for every film, and mine was no exception. I decided to start with, because the first scene is on the Chimaera with Thrawn and Pelion, and that's their introduction to the story, I decided to start with Thrawn's theme. I have written, or I should say at the time I had written Thrawn's A theme before I even started this. It was just kind of tooling around in my head for several weeks. It took me quite a while to nail down, but I'm pretty happy with it. And I thought, well, what better way to show us that this is something new than to just start with that, especially if we're panning down to the Chimaera, Thrawn's vessel. We'll just give it a really big and bold statement so that you don't forget it, and make it bellicose, you know, because it's a warship. You know, he's out to make war. It's a very complex theme, and it gets more complex treatment later on in the score. But for now, you know, we want that big bold statement, if for no other reason than we want to solidify it in the mind of the listener, right? So repetition and unambiguous presentation is the way you do that. Here it is in the English horn. And then into the main statement. Here's the ship. Horns in particular just sound unbelievable with this library. That's the other thing too about cinematic studio strings, is that you can just literally write any kind of run you want. Like, you don't have to limit yourself to you know, the Hollywood runs kind of thing, where it's just like you only have a scale. You do 1 octaves or 2 octaves, up or down. That's it. That's all you can do. Sorry. Whereas with these, you can literally just leave it on marcato and go up, down, all around. Change the nature of the scale mid-flight if you want to. I mean, your players will revolt probably, but I think John Williams does that all the time. And you could just do anything. The evolution of these libraries is honestly staggering. It's just wonderful to just be able to do this, you know? The runs are maybe a little too perfect. That is the drawback here, but they're so close that it's really not cause to complain in my book. We cut to the interior here. Star Destroyer bridge. Those of you who are connoisseurs of Star Wars music can tell that there's a specific source I derived this sort of pseudo-ostinato for the Imperial sort of bridge crew. I'm not going to tell you where, though, but it's, of course, in a Star Wars movie. And then we have a nice little, very Star Wars-y timpani solo. because as you all are no doubt aware, John Williams' brother, is a timpanist, and he always loves to write nice, juicy parts for him. And of course, again, I'm a percussionist, so what, you think I'm not going to do that? Of course I'm going to do that, and I'm going to wish that I could be there to play the timpani part in person, But yeah, that's part of the John Williams formula, and it's one of my favorite parts. All right, here we are at the second track, Rukh and Thrawn's Museum. For those of you who haven't read the books, Rukh is Thrawn's bodyguard and assassin. He's a Nogri. He just kind of stays in the shadows. He's actually a very intimidating presence as described in the books, which is why I thought the best way to come in with the second cue was just right on the reveal where Pellaeon is startled by Rukh. He didn't know he was there as he was approaching the Admiral's quarters. Rukh obviously realizes it's a friend and ally and stops cold, but Pellaeon just had absolutely no awareness of his presence. And that combined with his kind of horrific visage, as again described in the book, I definitely wanted to hit it rather forcefully, to sort of add. I was imagining like a snap cut to this, the profile of this creature, like with a weapon, ready to strike. Now, I spent a lot of time researching, various cultures on Earth to see if there was some roughly analogous sort of palette that I could use for that, and I didn't really come up with anything, which is, I think a testament to the writing and the world building. So what I did instead was I basically went back to my roots as a percussionist. I was like, okay, let's just go nuts with this. Let's throw the kitchen sink at it, make it wild and crazy and startling, and it's not totally without precedent, right? There's the Tusken Raider stuff in episode 4 is very, very similar to this approach, but I did add Flutter Tongue winds. Which basically Flutter Tongue in general later on in the score is going to be synonymous with Nogri presence, as well as Rukh's theme. I liked his theme as a melody so much, which is played on the alto flute here immediately after the sting, the sort of jump scare kind of thing, and that sort of is interchangeable between Rukh and basically all Nogri because they play such a huge part in the story. So here is the big impact. You're probably wondering what the hell all of that was. For starters, there's some tongue drum. I don't think I used the Chinese kettle drums. Definitely a prepared piano. Let's see. Devil Chasers, yep. What's here in the auxiliary percussion? Onglungs. Log drum, which plays a huge role in Nogri presence everywhere, especially in the big action cue that ends the first half of the disc. The first half of the first disc. Pulley sticks. Claves, which is another very John Williams thing, even in Star Wars specifically. Slapstick right in the beginning to help add some heft to the hit. Cymbal scrape. So it's just a lot of things going on at once. This is basically, this and definitely the action cue ambush on Bimasari is basically just like a concerto for like 8 to 10 percussionists. Like, you have to have so many people on the stage to do this at once. I would never ask a regular orchestra to perform this, because the standard is usually like 3-ish plus timpani. But, you know, we're pretending like this was recorded in London or maybe Los Angeles, where you can hire as many percussionists as you like because you have infinite budget. How nice. The low strings kind of sneak in afterwards to provide just to continue a little more of the menace, while the alto flute carries the Rukh/Nogri theme. And I mean, the alto flute was the obvious choice here, because you don't want to stray too far into like actually using like a world instrument as your soloist. That's not really a John Williams thing to do. You know, alto flute is relatively mainstream, and it still gets you a very comparatively exotic sound, which is kind of what we're going for here, because the Nogri are aliens, and they're, you know, very different from us. Just a little swell in the log drums and onglungs. Oh, just the log drum. I must have taken that out. Yeah, and then, of course, you know, big part of the Star Wars formula is transitions between scenes. I don't know if this would be a straight wipe, but I think it works either way. If it's just a regular cut, still works. And then here is where it goes into different territory, because Thrawn is a different villain. He's not really something the Star Wars universe had ever seen before at that point. And I really wanted to drive home, because this scene is so good. It's so good at revealing his character to us. And his character is not... It's like the polar opposite of Vader. He's not about ego. He's not about overt power. He's about subtlety, and he's about... you know, it doesn't matter where the idea comes from as long as it works. He's about outthinking and outmaneuvering his enemies, not brute forcing anything. He never does things that... It's just... It turns the whole villain formula for Star Wars on its head, which at the time was, again, it blew my mind. And that's really what I wanted to capture in this scene in particular. And I thought, well, okay, what's the best way to sort of get the point of thoughtfulness across? And I sort of settled on this meditative ostinato kind of thing. Ostinatos are a thing that John Williams has done in Star Wars, but that's absolutely the right approach here, because I specifically use Tibetan prayer bowls at the base of all of this, and I sort of layer other more traditional melodic percussion on top of that: celeste, crotales, finger cymbals, stuff like that. Very metallic, you know, high treble sounds, because it's just very... There is something very meditative about this guy, and that's what makes him so dangerous. He will not take an action without thoroughly thinking it through, and in a way that most people wouldn't. You know, so and the other part of his formula too is that he is a huge appreciator of art, which is great because it makes him more complex. And so to see someone not only appreciate art, but use that insight in his tactics was another part of the reason why I love these books so much, is because he's a fascinating character. So, and what do we see when we're first introduced to him here in this scene? Pelion is finding him studying art in his little makeshift museum in his quarters. Images of the cinematography that immediately came to mind is, okay, we just get several successive shots of all this artwork, right? And the ostinato that sort of carries over that, just, it works really well in my mind's eye. So let's see what you think. We're in 6/8 now. Bode vibes. And here is solo violin. And I just want to take a second here to shout out. I have an extremely talented mother. Her name is Tracy LaGuardia. She played the solo for me. She is one of the most versatile violinists I have ever met in my life because she can do any style imaginable. She can fiddle. She can improvise jazz solos. You can literally just give her a lead sheet and just say make some stuff up and she'll do it, which is not a common trait for violinists. Usually they need something written out for you completely. She can do classical stuff. She's done concertos before. Just unbelievable range. In this particular instance, of course, matching with the sort of tone and the concept I was going for, I told her to play without much expression. Which is generally goes against a musician's instincts. You want to imbue the line with some soul and some flair and all of that stuff. But in this case, I had her hold back a little bit. There was time in the following track to let her loose a little bit in that regard, which was really fun. And here we get to the B theme, which, to have a proper John Williams villain theme, you got to have a B section. And I love me some good voice leading. I was terrible at it when I first started as a composer, but now it's my favorite thing about writing music. Because once you actually get good at it, you develop good instincts about it. It gives so much in places where it would otherwise be a little bit boring. And this is one such instance. Let's see. Yeah, see, we have the cellos kind of doing this arc that goes up and then down into the downbeat. And then the violas. Where are the violas, man? There we go. The violas go way down and then come up into the downbeat. And the combination of those two things just really works well. And the poor violins, too, almost never have, an interesting line compared to violin one. So, that's something I gave them. That makes the whole, retard there way more interesting to listen to because of that counter line, really fairly busy counter line in the second violins. And then I give the melody to the English horn, which is... once again, Aaron Venture, this time woodwinds. And then we have Mom finish it out with a lovely ascending line, very reminiscent of the end of Leia's theme, except it's a lot more unresolved and strange and still very elegant, because the man is nothing if he isn't elegant. Glass marimba. All right, and for the final track, Marg Sabl. It's called that, by the way, because Marg Sabl is the name of the closure maneuver Thrawn uses towards the end to defeat the New Republic task force. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The track starts with the reveal of the New Republic task force, which in my mind is an exterior shot. You know, we're watching them. Maybe the camera kind of swivels as they pass by towards the Chimaera. And you'll notice this is the first track where I really got serious about my timings, about how long I think each, scene or shot or segment will actually transpire. And so I started using the markers, and these markers are a great tool in film scoring because they help you find the ideal tempo between 2 points. They also just help you hit things if you want to hit them. They're just really good at orienting you and filling out the map of where you want the cue to go before you actually start writing. And you'll notice the first one here says New Republic Anthem, which is because I wrote a fanfare for the New Republic before I started this track. And that's the thing about these kinds of scores. The writing of the actual themes is like 70% of the effort here. Like actually nailing down a theme that is good enough to be reused in different contexts and morphed and mangled into various different variations. Finding something that has that staying power and that feels right for whatever it is you're trying to capture, whether it's a character or an idea or an organization, whatever it is. It's very time consuming, and once you have it locked into place, the writing process gets a whole lot easier because then you just you just riff on it. You're not coming up with a melody from scratch. So naturally I sort of took my cue from the what's it called, from episode 7, the March of the Resistance here a little bit. Horn line. Here's the return of that imperial ostinato-y kind of thing in the strings. And the battery is just having a blast, of course. And then here's where Thrawn belays the order, and we shift. The ostinato takes very much a back seat to the solo violin. And the solo violin, by the way, is... I'm really glad I made that decision, not just because I have a free player, but because it's just such a nice reversal of expectation. Like, generally in Star Wars films, and especially in the original trilogy, villain themes are like, they are in your face and just bombastic as hell. And not that his theme can't be that way, and you'll hear more of that later on, but using a solo violin gives it so much more elegance, and which again is so perfect for his fascination with art and the way that he sort of thinks about things. Also, a friend of mine pointed out that it highlights his Holmesian similarities, which was actually a cool connection that I didn't consciously think of while I was like trying to figure out how to approach Thrawn musically, but it kind of works. It's cool. And here, I let her open up a little bit more expressive. Here Thrawn is leaning in, watching his tactical readout, waiting to see what the enemy does, and boom! One of the TIE fighters wink out, and he knows exactly what to do, just based on their attack posture. He's got them in a corner, and they don't even know it yet. Which, again, is just a cool way. It's maybe a little over the top. Like, real commanders are not that insane, anticipating their opponent's tactics. But yeah, it's Star Wars. We'll give it a little pass there. And it's kind of a just cool thing, because we don't actually know entirely how Thrawn was able to do that. It could just be that he just has an encyclopedic knowledge of all of the fleet maneuvers in his head that certain commanders use, and he's just like, okay, well, I know that. It's just the way that you can, for example, I can probably identify a classical composer in a matter of seconds because I know all of their little tells, right? The way that they like to write certain things and the way they like to orchestrate certain things, you just know after a while, after you've been exposed to it enough. It is implied, he definitely outright says it's because of art. Like, he knew an Elaman, I think, was commanding the task force, and because he studied their art, he knows how they think, which is a little reductive, but, you know, it's a huge story. Anyway, point is, he knows what's going on now. He's got him cold, and the whole dynamic shifts. I modulate for the first time, and things go downhill for the good guys. And then here's one of my favorite portions of the whole track. We get a really brief exterior shot of the Chimaera sort of rolling into attack position, which is not something, you know, necessarily that would be there. I think it would be, though. It's something I would want to see. And so the way I did that was to give Thrawn's theme and the little counter melody that I kind of developed for him too, which is a very chromatic kind of squirrely, you know, unsettled, like, over the top gesture. It's really fun. And of course, it can't be John Williams without triplet staccatos in the trumpets. I have the soloist on an ostinato, and then the ensemble takes over after another modulation. Once we switch to from Thrawn reassuring Pelion that no, they're definitely going to fall for this, to the exterior shot of the good guys getting closer and moving into attack position, and then we get into some fairly spicy action cue stuff. I wouldn't call this a proper action cue, but there's definitely a small portion of it that gets close. Yeah, that's the other thing, too. Where are the strings? Oh, they're in score order this time. I'm not very consistent about that. Shame on me. Yeah, this stuff, too, is like, I wasn't expecting that to come out as good as it did. Once again, very grateful. I actually, in the very first track, when I was trying to mock up that part with the rebos and trying to make it sound realistic, I was not having a good time. I was like, these libraries are not up to the task. Maybe this is a project I should just throw away, you know, just bin it and maybe never come back to it, or come back to it later when I have a better library. But then I just decided, you know what? I've got a little bit of money saved up. Why don't I just ask around and see if there's a way that I can, if there's a string library that can fill this gap. And sure enough, Mason Lieberman was the one who recommended Cinematic Studio Strings, and boy, has it done the job. I've been grateful to that guy. I mean, listen, listen to this line. Okay, so what I do with the horns there is not recommended unless you have literally the London Symphony, because that's really high. Like, what is that? Let's see. I mean, here is about where they were in A New Hope, on a similar like triplets, and these are just triads. John Williams loves playing with triads in the brass. That's one of his signatures. Not that he's the only one who does it, but that's if you want to start writing Star Wars music, and make it sound like him, that's one of the easiest shortcuts to get there. But yeah, this D is already pretty high. This F sharp is nutty. Like, yeah, don't do that to anyone but like the most seasoned professionals out there. Because it's gonna take it, and even then it's probably gonna take a few takes. Like, that's hard. But I mean, the resulting effect is fantastic. So, and you know, Hollywood horn players are used to being abused that way. And so yeah, things are already starting to go a little wrong for the good guys. But then we cut to the strings here. It's becoming clear that everything is lost for the good guys, and Thrawn starts explaining why. Obvious choice here is a montage a la Episode 3, Massacre. You'll notice even this initial part, but especially this part, is noticeable as the fanfare from the beginning, the fanfare for the New Republic. But it's a dirge now. It's in the strings, and the voice leading is just miserably sad. See here, I have the oboes coloring the horns here. There's a lot of that in both John Williams and Gordy Hobb, where they just have the woodwinds lightly color the brass in some way, usually the horns. And it's a wonderful effect. It comes across well even in samples. So there was a lot going on there, but we were building. You know, the other commander is starting to realize he's finished. He's barking out orders. He's doing what he can to try and keep his people alive, to no avail. And in my mind, you know, the climax here is the Chimaera finally joins the fight, sends a volley, and just wipes out the main flagship, which is where the Thrawn's theme here is stated very powerfully in the low brass. And then we have solo oboe here. We transition into battle being over, we're just looking at wreckage now. That's odd. The MIDI doesn't match the audio there. Did I do some audio editing there? No? Well, that's an interesting mystery. But yeah, it's... so, in summary, a lot of this is just a combination of listening to an insane number of... well, an insane amount, rather, I should say, of John Williams music over the years, as a kid, as an adult, getting to study the scores in some cases. And also, shout out to Gordy Hobb for sharing his Jedi Survivor score as well. That is a resource that I will link below, because I genuinely think it's an amazing gesture and an amazing soundtrack, and it's just a goldmine. It's chock full of wonderful orchestrations and compositional choices, and it's a trend that I hope continues into the future. I'll just briefly mention, as far as mixes go, there's really not a whole lot to do. It's a whole lot of, like, I'll bring... You can see here I bring a lot of the percussion down in gain, even after I place them appropriately in the mix from within their libraries. Here, I'll give you an example of that. So you see here, I especially love using Cineperc for my percussion. And they give you a lot of options for these mixes. And sometimes, like it is here for the harp harmonics, although I don't think I use those in this track, but for purposes of my demonstration, we'll just say, yeah, I wanted to use Tim's mix. Usually that sounds pretty good, but it needs to be pulled down in gain for it to sound right for the style, right? Because the John Williams style is to get a 60 to 80 piece orchestra in the same room together and all play in the same space, rather than striping individual sections and whatnot. So you don't want certain elements to be too present, otherwise it's not going to sound like a Star Wars score, right? It's not going to sound like the London Symphony recorded it. But sometimes even then, even if you place it in a more ambient or room-esque position, it still needs to be brought down a little bit. And that's just something you get to know, as you spend more time around ensembles. And that could be the concert hall as well as recording sessions. I would advise anybody who is wanting to get better at orchestration and mock-ups, either one of those things, to see if you can just attend rehearsals for your local community orchestras, or your semi-professional orchestras, or even the professional orchestras in your area. Just sit in on the rehearsal. Don't say a word. Just bring your score, and use your ear to determine. Oh, okay. So this is how that sounds. And sometimes the conductor will make adjustments, and there again is another great nugget of information. Like, okay, so this is how the conductor can adjust it on the podium, and this is how they can't. And learning how conductors do that on the fly during rehearsal is immensely more helpful than watching the actual concert and score studying, or listening to a recording and score studying. Because the technicalities, the details there, they matter, especially if you're an orchestra, if you're going to be doing this for someone else. Every little detail adds up. Anyway, I hope I didn't leave too much out. Really, the answer to how I got it to sound so good is, unfortunately, just have the best libraries, and that is half the battle. I mean, also having a system that can run your libraries, that's important too. There's another resource I'd highly recommend on this subject, which is Anne-Kathrin Dern. She has great videos on all of that. But for this specific project, I'll just list off the libraries that I used, and I'll list them below as well. And you really don't need much more than this to get started at this level, which is Air Venture Winds and Brass, Cinematic Studio Strings, Cineperk. I don't know if it has a pro delineation, but definitely get the pro if that's the thing. Cineharp, or the harp library doesn't really matter. Just pick one, but make sure it's buried in the mix appropriately. I only recommend Cineharp because it's easy. You can just hit a button that says ambient and boom, it sounds like a John Williams harp buried in the mix. There are definitely additional libraries that I used, especially for the more exotic stuff like the no-grease stuff. That's usually just a smattering of things like Storm Drum. I think there might have been some Silk or some Ra in there. With the more percussive, weird stuff, you don't have to be quite as like, oh man, I need the premium library for that, because percussion is easy to sample. You hit the thing, you record it, it sounds good. Yay, like it's done. It's the strings, the traditional orchestral sample stuff, the non-percussion stuff that you really have to worry about. And if you get those, the Air Venture Winds and Brass, Cinematic Studio Strings, you can get pretty close to this. Again, that's not a substitute for studying. I still highly recommend that you get your hands on as much material as you can, get as much rehearsal time into your life as you can. Doesn't matter if you're a player, probably better if you're not a player, because then you can focus totally on what the orchestra is doing, what the players are doing, what the conductor's doing, how they're rehearsing, how they problem solve balance issues and technical issues, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, and it's a never-ending lesson for us all. I'll still be learning till the day I die, and that's what I love about this path. Thanks for watching.